All characters and events in this story are fictional. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is purely coincidental. The story is inspired by personal accounts of foreigners in the Philippines and is intended for fictional and artistic purposes only.
Robert arrived on Panglao Island early in the morning. The sun was just rising over the turquoise sea. He carried a small suitcase and a worn backpack. The air smelled of salt and warm earth. For 6 months, he had been living on this island. His life in Oregon felt far away. Everything he had once known seemed distant and small. He wanted peace, quiet, and a fresh start. The guest house he found was run by a German man named Gunther. It was simple but cozy, with white walls and a small balcony. Robert placed his suitcase on the bed and looked out over the water. The waves moved slowly, sparkling in the morning sun. He breathed deeply, feeling some tension leave his body. For the first time in months, he felt calm. He unpacked his few clothes carefully. Then he walked down the small path toward the village. The streets were quiet, filled with the smell of cooking and flowers. He stopped at a small cafe by the shore. It was bright, painted in soft yellows and blues. That's where he saw her for the first time. Liza was behind the counter, arranging cups and plates. Her dark hair fell softly over her shoulders. Her eyes were warm brown, and she smiled at a customer gently. Robert felt an unexpected pull in his chest. He ordered coffee and sat near the window. He could not stop looking at her. She moved with quiet grace, careful and attentive. Their eyes met for a moment. He smiled awkwardly. She returned the smile lightly. For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. After his coffee, he returned to the guest house. He kept thinking about her on the balcony. Her laughter, small and soft, replayed in his mind. The next day, he went back to the cafe. He tried to start a conversation about small things: the weather, the boats, the slow rhythm of the island. She answered politely at first, but soon her answers became more relaxed. She laughed at his awkward jokes. Robert felt warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. He started visiting the cafe every day. They talked about their lives in small pieces. Robert told her about Oregon, his work, his family, and the life he had left. She spoke about her family, her island, and her small daily routines. Slowly, they began to share more personal thoughts. Robert found himself listening more than talking sometimes. He wanted to understand everything about her. She invited him to walk along the beach after his cafe visits. The sand was soft and warm under their feet. The waves reached their ankles gently. They pointed at small shells and laughingly collected them. Sometimes they just sat on a fallen log and watched the horizon. Robert felt a peace he hadn't known for years. He imagined a life like this, simple and calm, every day. Evenings were spent on the guest house balcony. They watched the sunset paint the sea in shades of pink and orange. Robert would sometimes tell small stories about his life. Liza would listen quietly, occasionally asking questions. Sometimes they sat in silence, hands touching lightly. Their connection grew slowly, quietly, and naturally. Robert felt alive again. The guest house became their sanctuary. Gunther noticed their closeness, but said nothing. Some mornings, they walked to the small market together. They bought fruits, vegetables, and sometimes small gifts for each other. Robert helped carry the bags and watched her bargain with the vendors. He laughed at her sharp tongue and the way she smiled after every deal. Their nights were often quiet, with only the sound of waves outside. Robert would hold her hand as they sat on the balcony. He imagined a future that included her every day. He imagined mornings with coffee, the sea, and her beside him. He imagined gentle walks with small conversations and laughter. One night, lying under the stars, he whispered quietly, "I want to stay here with you." She leaned her head on his shoulder but did not answer. Robert felt a flutter of hope. He did not know what the future held, but for the first time, he wanted to be here. Days passed, filled with small routines. They cooked meals together in the guest house kitchen. They laughed at small mistakes and accidental spills. Sometimes they simply sat together, watching the waves. Each moment felt important, delicate, and precious. Robert began to feel that he belonged here. He was no longer a visitor, no longer a stranger in a foreign land. He was part of a small world that mattered deeply. The air was filled with the smell of cooking, salt, and flowers. The nights were calm, and the stars were endless above them. Robert felt his chest tighten with a strange, quiet joy. He knew he was falling in love, and for the first time in years, he felt alive, present, and needed. After 6 months, Robert had to return to the United States for work. He packed his small suitcase carefully, checking every item twice. Liza helped him, arranging his clothes and handing him his backpack. They stood on the balcony for a long moment. The sea stretched endlessly behind her. "Will you come back soon?" she asked quietly. Robert nodded, trying to sound certain. "I will," he said, though he felt uncertain about timing. She smiled faintly and held his hand. They walked to the small dock together. The sun was low, painting the water gold. He hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of her body. "I will miss you every day," he whispered. She pressed her forehead to his and smiled softly. The boat arrived to take him to the airport. Robert stepped aboard, glancing back at her. She waved as the boat moved away. The island slowly disappeared behind the horizon. Back in Oregon, life felt hectic and fast. Robert returned to his routines, his work, and his empty apartment. He tried to focus, but Liza and the island were always on his mind. Weeks passed. He checked his messages every day, hoping to hear from her. Then, one morning, a message appeared on his phone. It was from Liza. She wrote that she had news. Robert opened it quickly, his heart racing. She was pregnant. Robert froze, staring at the words. A rush of emotions hit him at once. Joy, fear, disbelief, and responsibility all mixed together. He could not believe it at first. He read the message again, hoping he had misunderstood. But the truth was clear. She was carrying his child. Robert felt a surge of determination. He booked the first flight back to Panglao. He needed to be with her. He needed to protect both her and their child. The flight felt endless. He imagined her waiting at the guest house. He imagined holding her hand again, seeing her smile. He imagined a small child, half him, half her, moving inside her. When he finally landed, the warm island air hit him. He rushed to the guest house. Liza was waiting outside, her eyes wide and nervous. Robert ran to her and embraced her tightly. She laughed softly, resting her head against his chest. "I couldn't wait any longer," she whispered. Robert felt tears prick his eyes. Everything suddenly felt real and fragile at once. They went inside the guest house together. The familiar sounds, the smell of the sea, the soft creak of the balcony boards. It all felt like home. They talked quietly for hours about the baby. They discussed names, what they would need, and what life might be like. Robert promised to stay, to protect, and to support. He wanted to be the father he should have been from the start. The next day, they went to the local office. The paperwork was completed carefully and officially. Robert signed the documents. They were married, legally and formally. A sense of relief washed over him. He felt responsible and proud. Liza smiled, though a small shadow passed across her face sometimes. Robert tried not to notice. He focused on the baby, on her, on the little world they were building. They spent the rest of the week preparing the room. Soft clothes, small toys, and a crib were arranged carefully. Robert imagined holding the child in his arms for the first time. They cooked meals together in the small kitchen. They laughed at small mistakes and shared quiet moments. He watched her hands, her expressions, and felt a warmth that was both tender and sharp. Evenings were spent on the balcony. They watched the sunset and talked about future mornings. Robert imagined teaching the child to swim, to walk on the sand, to watch the stars. Each wave, each quiet moment felt like a gift. He thought of his life back in Oregon. It felt distant, unimportant compared to the world he had here with her. For the first time in years, he felt complete and present. He knew challenges would come, but he was ready to face them. This was his family now. This was his life. The first months of their marriage passed quietly. Robert settled into a rhythm with Liza. They cooked breakfast together most mornings. Sometimes they walked along the beach, collecting small shells. The sun warmed their faces and the sand their feet. Liza often told him stories about her childhood. Robert listened carefully, asking questions and smiling. The guest house became a small home for them. Gunther occasionally joined them for meals. He always smiled at their closeness, but never interfered. Robert felt he had found a small paradise. They laughed, joked, and shared quiet moments every day. But slowly, something began to change. Liza started leaving for a few days at a time. She said she was visiting her parents on a distant island. Robert trusted her. He told himself it was normal, that she needed family sometimes. But the absences became more frequent. Sometimes she did not answer messages for several hours. Other times, her replies were short and distracted. Robert began to feel a small knot of worry. He tried to ignore it, focusing on their child and daily life. Yet the quiet unease lingered in the back of his mind. He noticed small things, unexplained calls, sudden changes in mood, vague excuses. He asked questions lightly, but she smiled and changed the topic. One evening, after a long day, he cooked dinner alone. Liza returned late, smiling but distant. Robert tried to start a conversation. She nodded politely and said she was tired. He felt a sting of disappointment. It was the first time he sensed a wall between them. The next morning, she left again without explanation. Robert spent the day walking along the beach. He tried to calm his thoughts. He watched the waves and felt the wind on his face. He thought about the months they had shared. The laughter, the small meals, the quiet nights on the balcony. He wondered when the connection had begun to fray. He told himself he would be patient. He wanted to trust her, despite his worries. Days turned into weeks. Liza returned occasionally, smiling and affectionate, yet distant. Robert tried to hold on to the good moments, but he could not shake the growing unease. Then, one morning, she returned with a serious expression. Robert noticed immediately. She avoided his gaze. Her hands were folded tightly. "We need to talk," she said. Robert's stomach tightened. He felt a sudden cold fear. "What is it?" he asked. She paused, her eyes distant. "I think we need to divorce," she said quietly. Robert froze. The words echoed in his mind. He could not understand how it could happen. "Why? We have a child together." "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice shaking. She looked away, silent for a moment. Her face was calm, but firm. Robert felt shock and disbelief at the same time. He wanted to argue, to plead, to understand. But she did not give him any answers. She said only, "We cannot continue this marriage." Robert felt the ground beneath him shift. All the plans, all the dreams, all the months of happiness seemed to crumble. He wanted to yell, to demand a reason, but he also felt a strange heaviness. He realized that whatever she had decided, nothing he said would change it. She left quietly that day. Robert sat alone in the guest house, staring at the waves. The ocean, once comforting, now felt endless and cold. He thought about the child growing inside Liza. He wanted to protect it, no matter what. He resolved to continue supporting the child, despite everything. Yet the betrayal, the sudden collapse of their relationship, left him stunned. He walked along the shore, trying to gather his thoughts. Every wave seemed to echo his disbelief. The nights were long and sleepless. He could not understand how everything had changed so quickly, and he knew that the path forward would be difficult and uncertain. A few days later, Liza sent Robert a message. He read it carefully, his heart tightening with each word. She wrote that she wanted 500,000 pesos to cancel the marriage. Robert felt his stomach drop. He could not believe what he was reading. He stared at the screen, unable to move for several moments. A mixture of anger, disbelief, and sadness surged through him. He knew he could not give in to her demand. He took a deep breath and typed a reply. "This is your problem, not mine," he wrote firmly. He pressed send and felt a heavy weight lift slightly from his chest. He knew he was making the right decision. He would not be manipulated. But he also felt sorrow for the child. He resolved to continue supporting the baby, no matter what. The next morning, he booked a flight back to the United States. He had to distance himself from the chaos. The plane soared above the clouds, carrying him away from the island he had once called home. Robert's mind was a storm of emotions. He thought about Liza, the marriage, and the child. He felt disappointment and betrayal, but also determination. He would protect the child and do what was right. Days turned into weeks. Robert sent money regularly to ensure the child had everything needed. He kept detailed records of every transfer. Even though he was far away, he wanted to remain responsible. He imagined the child growing safely, happy and healthy. He hoped that one day he could meet the child and hold them in his arms. Christmas approached, and Robert felt a pang of loneliness. He called Gunther to wish him a happy holiday. Gunther laughed warmly over the phone. "I have news," Gunther said cautiously. Robert's heart raced. "What is it?" he asked. Gunther took a deep breath. "Liza has been staying at the guest house," he said slowly. Robert froze. "She was with a local man named Nick," Gunther continued. Robert felt a sharp pain in his chest. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. Gunther explained carefully. He had spoken with Nick. The man confirmed that he and Liza had been together for many years, long before Robert had arrived. Robert's mind reeled. He realized he had been deceived completely. The pregnancy, the marriage, the months of trust, they had all been part of a plan. He had been a temporary project, a means to secure money, and a legal marriage. Robert felt anger, betrayal, and disbelief all at once. But beneath the pain, he also felt clarity. He knew exactly what he had to do. He immediately stopped all unnecessary money transfers. He blocked Liza from every possible contact. He would continue to support the child, but nothing more. For the first time, He felt a sense of control amidst the chaos. He sat alone in his apartment, staring at the walls. The city outside was bustling, but he felt distant from it all. He thought about the months he had spent on the island. Every smile, every shared meal, every quiet evening. They had been real to him. But now he understood the truth. He had been used, manipulated, and deceived. He allowed himself to feel the anger fully. He let the betrayal wash over him like a storm. And then, slowly, he began to feel a strange relief. The uncertainty, the deception, the manipulation, they were over. He could now protect himself and the child. He closed his eyes and imagined calm waves on the island. He imagined holding the child in his arms one day. He imagined a life built on honesty and responsibility. Robert felt determination growing inside him. He would not allow anyone to control him again. The past had been painful, but it had also taught him valuable lessons. He was ready to move forward, stronger than before. Robert woke early the next morning. The sunlight streamed through the blinds. He sat at the small kitchen table, coffee in hand. The room was quiet, almost too quiet. He thought about everything that had happened. The love, the trust, the pregnancy, the marriage. All of it had been part of a lie. He felt a deep sadness in his chest. But he also felt clarity. He had done everything with honesty. The deception was not his fault. He thought about the child. He wanted to protect the baby, no matter what. He resolved to continue sending support regularly. The money was a duty he would fulfill, but he would no longer be manipulated. He thought about Liza and Nick. The truth was shocking and painful. Robert remembered the months he had spent on the island. Every walk, every meal, every quiet night. He had believed it was real, but it had been a carefully planned project. He had been used to secure money and a legal marriage. He felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. But beneath it, he felt relief. The uncertainty, the lies, and the manipulation were over. He could now take control of his life. He closed his eyes and imagined the waves on Panglao. He imagined holding the child one day. He imagined mornings filled with calm and laughter. He thought about Gunther and felt gratitude. He had been honest when Liza was not. Robert took a deep breath and let go of the past. He understood that he could not change what had happened. He could only move forward. He thought about the lessons he had learned. Trust must be earned. Love can be real, but it can also be exploited. He promised himself he would never be naive like that again. He would protect himself and his child. He would live with honesty and clarity. Robert imagined a new life in the United States. He saw himself building routines, focusing on work, and caring for the child. He saw weekends filled with small joys and quiet moments. The past would not define him. The pain would remain, but it would strengthen him. He could forgive himself for trusting too easily. He could let go of anger toward Liza. He would never allow her to manipulate him again. Robert felt a sense of peace he had not known in months. The ocean, the island, and the memories remained, but they no longer controlled him. He finished his coffee and stood up. The morning felt calm and bright. He looked out the window at the city stretching before him. He felt the weight of the past lifting slowly. He was free to make new choices, to love honestly, to live honestly, and to protect the child above all else. He thought about the future with cautious hope. Every step forward would be deliberate, careful, and strong. He knew the road would not be easy, but he was ready. Robert smiled faintly, feeling a mixture of sorrow and hope. A chapter had ended, and a new one was beginning. He would carry the memories, the lessons, and the strength into every day ahead. The past had hurt, but it had also taught him resilience. He would not let deception dictate his life again. He would live with honesty, courage, and determination. And he would protect what mattered most. The child was his responsibility, and he would honor that promise. Robert took a final deep breath. The pain, the loss, the betrayal, they were behind him. The sun rose higher, casting warm light across the room. He felt ready for the future, ready to face it fully and wisely. His heart, though scarred, was steady. The lessons of the past had made him stronger. And now he could finally move forward, free and determined.